The chemical tanker CPO Japan was sailing across the Mediterranean toward Gibraltar when a distress call came in from the Maltese Coast Guard. A boat carrying refugees has sunk, and all available ships were requested to provide assistance. International law requires that all ships must render assistance to any person found at sea in danger of being lost. The captain of the Japan heard the call and changed course. He assigned extra lookouts to take up positions all around the cargo deck. Ship crew throughout the region regularly kept watch for refugees and migrants that had risked crossing the Mediterranean, knowing how often such attempts ended in death. The crew of the Japan would do whatever they could to save any survivors. But when they reached the coordinates given in the distress call, all they saw were scores of bloated corpses floating in the sea. The ship slowed to avoid hitting the bodies. They heard from a container ship that was already at the scene that their crew had saved 5 people, but were about to end their rescue operation since it was getting dark. Trying to search for more bodies in the dark would be futile. Since the start of the European refugee crisis in 2014, merchant ships had been playing an indispensable role in saving lives as unprecedented numbers of refugees and migrants attempted the dangerous journey across the Mediterranean Sea. In the year of Doaa's shipwreck, commercial vessels rescued an estimated 40,000 people. However, they are ill-equipped to operate as search and rescue ships, and every attempt rescue costs the shipping company time and resources. The captain of the CPO Japan thought that he had done his part. He had answered the distress call, and no one would blame him for turning his ship around and continuing on course. But as he looked at the dead bodies floating around him, he decided to order the crew to release their lifeboat into the sea. If the other boat found 5 people alive, perhaps there might be others, he thought. He couldn't bear to give up when all he could see in the fading light was corpses. A silent, determined consensus prevailed among the crew as they set about launching their search. They were just merchant seamen, men from Eastern Europe and Philippines who had come together to man the vessel. While they weren't professional rescuers, they couldn't abandon the scene without at least trying. The wind was picking up, the water was choppy, and visibility was poor. The 3 crew members boarded a closed lifeboat, and other crew cranked the pulleys and slowly released it down into the sea. This high-tech model was designed to move through rough weather on high seas and remain watertight. They passed dozens of bobbing corpses as they set off. "Don't pick up the dead," the captain told them over the radio. "Just look for survivors." The crewmen circled the area, but found only more corpses. It seemed that their search was in vain. But suddenly, the captain's voice crackled over the radio. Back on the ship, a watchman on the bow had heard what they thought was a woman's voice calling for help. Somewhere out there, someone was still alive. The men in the lifeboat headed toward the bow, hoping to locate the source of the pleas for help. The wind grew stronger as they continued searching, making it difficult for them to pick up anything other than roaring noise. Periodically, they would stop the boat's motors so they could hear better. Every now and then, they could just make out the faint echoes of a woman's voice, but it seemed to come from a different direction every time. "Keep yelling," they shouted over and over, knowing that if she didn't, they'd never be able to find her. After 4 days and nights in the water with nothing to eat or drink, Doaa's strength was falling. Her arms ached and she was so dizzy that she was afraid she would pass out. She could no longer feel her lower legs, and her throat was raw from calling out over and over. She wanted to give up, but the weight of Massa and Malak resting on her chest filled her with the determination to live. She kept paddling to stay afloat, and with each push of her hand through the water, she would call out, "Ya Rab!" Oh God. But her voice seemed to disappear into the wind. She had spotted the CPO Japan when it first approached, and it had seemed so close, but now she couldn't see it at all. Where could it have gone? She wondered as doubt began to creep up on her, and she became more and more certain that she and the girls would die before anyone found them. Then, as if Allah had at last answered her prayers, Doaa heard voices calling. She could just make out a few English words. "Where are you? Keep talking so we can follow your voice and find you." Suddenly, a wave rocked her, and the voices grew muffled, as if they were drifting further away. Then they stopped altogether. Doaa frenetically searched her mind, trying to remember an English word for help. When it didn't come to her, she instead used any word she knew and all her remaining strength to project them forth. "Can't they see me?" she wondered, as she bobbed in the water, worried that perhaps she wasn't making any sound at all, or that she was hallucinating. But she could see that the searchlight was scanning back and forth over the waves, and each time she cried out, the light would sweep closer to her. She willed the bright beam to illuminate her float as she paddled frenetically toward it. Her determination to save Malak and Massa gave her strength that she didn't know she still had. The girls were barely moving now, beginning to lose consciousness. Doaa splashed water on their faces to keep them awake, and as quickly as she could, steered her way around the corpses and toward the sound of her only hope. She couldn't let Massa and Malak die now, that rescue was so close. Doaa's mouth was so dry that the sound coming out seemed to make a crackling noise through her lips. She wasn't sure how long she could continue shouting or keeping herself and the girls afloat. But her fear that if she stopped yelling, the sergeant would give up and the girls would die kept her going. Massa and Malak were both limp now, lying listless on her chest. Doaa felt as if their blood circulated through her own veins and that all their hearts were beating in unison. Their lives depended on her getting to that rescue boat. Once Massa and Malak are safe, she thought, I can go back to the spot where Bassem drowned and be with him again. The thought that she only had to last a little while longer and then she could rest and be with Bassem comforted her. Finally, after 2 hours, a sailor looking out of the window of the lifeboat and cried, I see her. Suddenly, the spotlight swiveled toward Doaa.
Thank you so much, Elin Klinga. The piece we just heard described when Doaa Al Zamel is finally rescued after 4 days at sea, escaping the war in Syria to reach peace in Sweden. And the movie we watched is produced by actress Kate Blanchett, who is also the Goodwill Ambassador of UNHCR. And it's based upon the poem What They Took With Them, which holds the stories of refugees and what they took with them when they were uprooted from their homes. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to present this night, A Night for Syria. Welcome to you all, and welcome to those of you watching us through live stream from around the world. My name is Alexandra Pascalidou, and this topic is part of my life, my identity, my history. I'm a refugee. My parents, my grandparents, my grand-grandparents, all of them had to leave what they loved. They had to leave their countries, their families. They were uprooted because of wars. And the history of Greece is the history of exile, of refugees, of the diaspora. And I was born in exile until I came here to this peaceful and prosperous country. And in fact, my first appearance in Swedish media was when I was 6 years old in Expressen, and I was this refugee case because we were threatened by expulsion, hiding for 2.5 years. But I'm still here. So, we are here tonight because the war in Syria recently marked its 7th year. And that's longer than the World War II. That's 7 years of violence raging across Syria. And what we're witnessing is the biggest refugee crisis in modern times. More than half of the country's population have been forced to flee Syria or been internally displaced. Over 6 million people have left their home inside Syria. That's half the country's population, uprooted by war. We have to remember, even if many try to forget, that the war is still going on right now, this very moment, while the rest of the world hasn't been able to do anything positive for Syria's population. On the contrary, I would say, some states have added gasoline to the fire. The refugee crisis is not over, at least not for the refugees. And neither can we allow ourselves to forget that behind every number, there is a human story. There is a human being. There is a father, there is a mother, a sister, a brother, and Alan Kurdi. Tonight, we'll meet one of these heroes behind the numbers. So we are very honored to have Doaa Al Zamel with us here tonight. Doaa escaped the war in Syria, and as I told you, she's today living in Sweden. And we also have the author of the book, Melissa Fleming, who's the spokesperson, the global spokesperson for UNHCR. Melissa has just arrived to Sweden after visiting Syrian refugees in Jordan and Lebanon. So please help me to give them a warm welcome. And Yasmina, of course, I'm sorry, the interpreter. You're so welcome, all of you. So, as a spokesperson for UNHCR globally, I mean, you met so many refugees, and there are 65 million refugees
Actually,
around.
Revise that, it's almost 67 by now. So.
Oh, two more.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just keeps going up.
Yeah, and you haven't met them all, but you met many of them. And I mean, several stories of resilience. You've been traveling. So I'm wondering, and you decided to write this book. I really hope that everybody will be able to read it, and you can buy it outside afterwards, and you can have a signature and so on. But what made Doaa's story so special? What made it stand out? And you have said in interviews that it kept you couldn't even sleep at night when you were thinking of Doaa.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Alexandra. There are, as you mentioned, 65, they're actually almost 67 million. I wish I could tell all the stories, because all of the stories are compelling in some way. They're amazing stories of survival. But there is this saying that statistics are human beings with the tears dried off. So if I were to tell you about the 67 million people, I think you would just your eyes would be glazing over. The way we have to communicate the human story. And when I read about Doaa's story, actually in the media, I opened my news feed that morning, and I read about this shipwreck on the Mediterranean Sea. 500 people had died, and at that time in 2014, it was the worst shipwreck so far in recent times. And there was this young woman who was 19 years old, and when she was rescued, she'd been on the Mediterranean Sea, and if you can imagine, I don't think it was depicted in the reading, she was afloat on a child's floating ring, the kind that we use for toddlers, in swimming pools and calm seas. She was perched on this. You can see she's luckily very petite, for 4 days and for 4 nights. And during that time, she was entrusted with the lives of 2 little babies. One was 9 months old, Malik, and the other was 18 months old, Masa. And she had to watch as Malik's grandfather drowned in front of her eyes. He'd already lost 27 members of his family. And she had to watch as Masa's older sister, her mother, and her dad also drowned. And worst of all for her, she had to watch as the love of her life slipped from her grip and drowned after the second day in the water. The fact that she managed, when 500 people lost their lives, to survive in those conditions, and to even save one of those child's lives, it was remarkable. And I needed to go and meet Doaa, and so I flew to Crete. And
you flew to Crete, where Doaa was.
Yeah.
Thank you for summarizing this terrible story. But you flew to Crete, you met Doaa. How was she when you met her?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she wanted to see me particularly, but I was so moved by her story that I insisted on going to meet her, and she quite kindly hosted me, and she was taken in by an Egyptian family on Crete, and we sat in her living room, and I think we had an almost immediate connection, and she entrusted me with her story. And, she was very traumatized, obviously, from what had happened, very fragile, and yet she saw the importance of telling the story. She was furious at the circumstances of what happened in the shipwreck. It was not just an accident. It was a deliberate attack on her boat that sunk the ship. And she wanted those people who were responsible to be served justice.
Which we
they haven't.
Don't know.
No.
I mean, I was so frustrated when I read the story, and I asked you, who are these people? Who are these murders?
The reality is it was a refugee boat, and so there's no international investigation. I mean, you probably all remember the Costa Concordia, the cruise liner that had crashed on the shores of Italy. Well, there was months and months of investigation. We knew everybody's name. If it's a refugee boat, nothing ever happens, unfortunately.
Human
so we
value.
never found human. Yeah, and that's why it became even more important to me to get the world to know who Doaa was. At least one of the people, one of those 500, who survived that boat. Only 11 survived. And little Massa is also living in Sweden too. So we're very grateful to this country for providing both of them with refuge and asylum. Yeah.
Doaa, my heroine. I can't even understand how you did it. I know how to swim, but I would never, ever manage what you did. Out there, in the sea, with people drowning and dying in front of your eyes, the man you loved, your fiancé, and you also had an experience when you were a kid, and that's how the book starts, when you almost drowned, where your fear for the water is so well described. So my first question to you is, how did you do it?
المسؤولية هي المسؤولية اللي خلتني أقدر كمل بطفلتين كانوا معاي.
It's responsibility, the feeling of being responsible. That feeling made me continue for the sake of those two girls that were with me.
طفلتين ما بيعرفوا مين حاضنهم بعرض البحر.
Two girls who don't know who is holding them out there in the middle of the sea.
ما كان بإيدي أعمل أي شيء بين التعب والعطش والجوع والرعب.
I couldn't do anything. I was just there. I was hungry, tired, thirsty.
بس ما كان بدي أستسلم ولا لحظة.
But for not one moment did I want to give up.
كنت بدي كمل للآخر لأقدر أنقذ الطفلتين.
I wanted to go all the way to the end to save those two girls.
لم يكن الأمر سهلا لكنني فعلته.
This was not easy, but I did it.
But I'm thinking that even their parents and even their relatives gave up. They lost the fight with the sea, with everything. And you were still there. And you were only 11 person that survived.
للأسف.
From 500, how many were you?
من 500 شخص أنقذنا أنا والطفلتين وكانوا معنا يمكن 5 شباب هيك شيء.
Out of 500 people, I survived, 2 girls and maybe 5 more guys, I believe.
It was, in the end, it was 11 survivors, yeah. 11 survivors, yeah.
And one girl, Masa, is with you in Sweden.
إيه ماسة هي بالسويد بس ما عندي تواصل معها للأسف.
Yes, Masa is in Sweden, but I don't have any contact with her, unfortunately.
Why?
Please.
ما في سبب معين.
There is no reason in particular for that.
She will someday. We will. When the time is right, yeah, we will.
Because when you were rescued,
Yeah.
she was with you. Huh? The 2 girls were with her?
She was rescued. When she was rescued, the 2 girls were alive and with her. But you can tell Doaa.
The 2 girls, when you were rescued on this boat and taken to Crete, you had the 2 girls were alive. They were with you.
البنتين كانوا معي. كانوا تنتين بحضني أنا. والحمد لله أني قدرت أني أنقذهم وساعدهم. بس للأسف واحدة عاشت 5 ساعات وتوفت.
The 2 girls were with me, yes, that's correct. They were in my arms. And thank God they survived. But one of them, she survived for 5 more hours, then she died.
وما تم إنقاذها وهلأ هي عايشة بالسويد.
But Masa was saved and she now lives in Sweden.
I think to say a little bit of an anecdote about Masa, when she was taken to the island of Crete, both of them were into separate hospitals, and Masa was taken to the pediatric hospital, and the doctors there said that she was on the edge of death, and they were really worried that even if she did survive, she would have brain damage or something. But you're Greek, you know, they not only had good medical care, but they put all of their love into caring for this baby. And all of Greece, they were calling her Nadia because they didn't know who she was, wanted to adopt her. And And after a while, she pulled through. And what happened was then Doaa was recovering in another hospital, and this family befriended her, and all of a sudden all these messages started coming in on Facebook saying, Doaa, do you know what happened to my brother, my daughter, my father? And she had to always answer, I'm sorry. But one of those messages that came in said, Doaa, I think that you saved my niece, Masa. And in that message, there was an attachment, a photo of little Masa, and it was from her uncle, who had already arrived in Sweden the year before. And that's how they became connected again, and how Masa is now growing up and going to school in this country.
And Masa was Palestinian, or was she from?
She was Palestinian. Yeah.
She was Palestinian.
Palestinian Syrian.
Okay.
So she grew up in near Damascus, in the outskirts of Damascus. Yeah.
Yeah. I would like to ask you, Doaa, how was your life before everything started in Syria? Your life in Dara?
كانت حياتي مستقرة بين أهلي، بين إخواتي، بمدرستي، بين رفقاتي. ما كنت دائما أتصور إنه هذا الشيء رح يحدث معي يوم من الأيام، بس للأسف كل شيء انكسر وتهجرنا وتشردنا، والموت لحديت الآن ما عم بيوقف.
I had a stable life back in Dara. I was with my family, I went to school, I had friends. I could never imagine that all this would happen. But unfortunately, everything broke, everything was destroyed. We were displaced, we came here, but to this day, the killing is continuing.
Your father was a hairdresser?
بابا كان حلاق، بس للأسف انهدم المحل، انهدم البيت، ما عاد في إنا أي شيء بدرعة.
Yes, that's correct. My father was a hairdresser, but unfortunately his business was destroyed, the house was destroyed. We have nothing left in Daraa.
كان الوضع صعب كتير من ناحية المداهمات، الاغتصابات من قبل الأمن، من قبل جيش الأسد. للأسف لهيك نحن اضطرينا إنه نهاجر.
The situation was very difficult because of the razzias, because of the ongoing rape, because of the measures taken by the security forces, Assad's military, and therefore we had to leave.
وللأسف هو لحديت الآن عم بيضرب وعم يقتل، موت أطفال، نساء وتهجر، ولحديت الآن ما في أي حل، كله بس إنه حكي حكي حكي.
And it's still going on. Nothing has changed. The bombing, the killing, people dying, people being displaced. Nothing is happening. It's all talk, talk, talk.
And Melissa and Doaa, you both know that the debate is quite hard, quite toxic in many parts of the world when it comes to refugees, and very xenophobic. And I think that if many people would see Doaa, they wouldn't think this is a hero, but would think otherwise. And they would also, I mean, I hear so many people asking, so why do they risk their lives? You know, going, I mean, on small boats, risking their lives. Do they have any alternatives?
I think, that this feeds into the, some of the debate. And I remember in 2015 when so many refugees like Doaa were taking the dangerous journey across the Mediterranean Sea and trying, to come to Europe. We surveyed them and asked them, particularly those who were leaving countries like Jordan or Turkey or Lebanon, why did you leave? Why are you coming here? And they cited two things that I think the politicians here took note of. The top reasons they said they left those countries was because they were not allowed to work. And the second reason was that they couldn't put their children in school. And when you think about it, if any of you are parents, as I am, the number one priority that you have as a mother or a father is that your children are educated. And yet at that time, only 20% of Syrian children were able to go to school. This was a really compelling reason to move on. So I'm saying this because, yes, we need to invest more in the countries that are hosting so many refugees. 84% are in the poor, the developing countries. But at the same time, we need to increase resettlement, which is the mechanism that UNHCR has to identify refugees who are vulnerable, people like Doaa, people like her family who were threatened by the smugglers afterwards, and UNHCR was able to bring them from Egypt here to Sweden. These programs allow refugees to get on an airplane. They allow the community that is receiving them to be prepared to receive them. And you know, it's really important to increase that. So more investment where they are, but also more responsibility sharing through resettlement. Obviously, do everything that we can to stop the wars that are driving so many people from their homes. But you know, that's the constant message.
And you and UNHCR helped to reunite, to resettle the whole family.
UNHCR, through its resettlement program, and we work very closely with the government of Sweden. Sweden is a major resettlement country, and it's a program that works very well. We submitted the profiles of Doaa. They were very aware of her story, her circumstance, and she was considered, you know, a woman at risk, a vulnerable woman. And Sweden is doing its, you know, international. It's not even just a good deed in a way; it's a responsibility to help people in need who are refugees like Doaa.
Yeah. So Doaa, how is your life today in Sweden?
شبه مستقرة، مع اني بتمنى اني هلا تكتمل عائلتي باخواتي اللي مو هون، مو بالسويد، برا السويد، وبعدهم عم بيعانوا بالاردن ولبنان.
My life is almost stable today, although I still have siblings that I'm not reunited with. They are now in Jordan and Lebanon.
وانا هلا عم بدرس السويدي، لغة سويدية.
I'm currently studying Swedish,
انا واهلي.
my family and I.
بين الشعب السويدي الطيب.
We are here amongst this wonderful people, the Swedish people.
شعب طيب قادرين نحن نعيش بيناته، بيقدر يقدم وبده دائما يساعد.
A people with a good heart. It's possible to live amongst you, and you're always willing to help.
Men du kan ganska mycket svenska. Even if you use Jasmina here. Eller hur? Svara! Du förstår. No, you don't translate. Så, vad drömmer du om nu?
بدي اتجمع باخواتي، بدي يخلص الكابوس اللي احنا عايشين فيه السوريين، بدي نكون دائما ايد واحدة.
I want to reunite with my siblings, and I want this nightmare, the nightmare that the Syrians are living, I want that to stop.
بدي ادرس، بدنا نعيش بسلام.
I want to study, to live in peace,
بدون اي عنصرية.
without any racism.
Without any racism.
بدون أي عنصرية.
Yes. Great. What would you like to work with?
بمجال الحقوق.
Law.
I really hope you will do that. You would make a great lawyer. I'm sure.
بتمنى.
I wish so.
Yes. But do you dream of going back to Syria one day? Because I'm asking you, because I grew up here in Sweden with a daily dream of one day going back home to Greece. And I'm still here, 40 years later.
للأسف بتمنى أكيد.
Yeah, I'm sad to say so, but yes, I dream of that. I wish for that.
بس الوضع صعب كتير وكل ماله دائما بيسوء أكتر. ما في أمل.
But the situation is very bad and it's only getting worse. There is no hope.
بس لازم نحن نصنعه من نفسنا.
But we have to make that hope.
There is no hope. Melissa, there is no hope. And the most of the refugees, am I right or am I wrong, dream of going back to their homelands one day? Or
I have never met a refugee who has not said, I want to go home someday. If it is only maybe to visit, but most refugees in the Syria situation are desperate to go back home, to return back home. But they're losing hope. They're really not seeing an end. We're here to commemorate 7 years of this horrible war. We're entering into the 8th year. And in the last couple of months, we've seen some of the worst atrocities in the entire war. I mean, it is so painful. And the only good thing about it is the world woke up again a little bit. And there have been headlines and spotlight on Eastern Ghouta and on Afrin and on the suffering of the people in besieged areas. But there are many parts of the country that are where there are people who are trapped, where humanitarian organizations like UNHCR, and we have 450 staff inside Syria, who can't sleep at night because they are so disturbed that they have the food, the medicines, the shelter materials to go in and to bring those to the people in need, and they're impeded by whichever force is in control in that area. And it's awful because it's not a fight of fighters against fighters. It's the civilians who are really taking, the toll and dying and suffering, and children are not spared as targets.
But what can we do to end this war?
Well, we, as UNHCR, as humanitarians, we're there, to just help the victims. We are constantly calling on those who have influence, and unfortunately, the Syria has become, the longer the war has gone on, the more complex and difficult to resolve it has become. The more international players have become involved. It's not just a civil war; it's become an international proxy war. And there are many parties involved, and so until they all make a decision that the time has come to have peace in Syria, this is going to continue, unfortunately.
You just visited Lebanon and Jordan.
And Turkey as well, actually.
And Turkey as well, where you met, among others, Syrian refugees. Can you please give us...
Yeah, well, as the years go on as well, the conditions for refugees have gotten worse. It's not because, the donor support, and I have to again thank the government of Sweden and the private donors of Sweden. I know many of you are in the audience who have been so incredibly generous. It's just that the needs keep growing, and so that's why we keep needing to ask for more as the years go on. The savings have dried up. There are not enough people who can send money to others. So we have refugees really living in abject poverty. And this is a population that used to live actually in, even though it was very oppressive politically, the living conditions were quite good in Syria before the war. The people like Doaa had an apartment, others had houses, they had gardens, they could access health care, they could go to schools. So the shock of now living in a tent in a muddy field in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon and having to send your child to work in the field instead of to school, it's just really depressing for people, and it's weighing on them. So it's really urgent that as long as this war is continuing, that we continue to help Syrians. It's the humanitarian right thing to do, but I want to make one further point. It's also in the strategic self-interest of the world to invest in the refugees. The refugees are going to be the future engineers and architects and doctors and teachers and hopefully leaders of Syria. If you invest in them, you're investing in reconciliation, in a future of peace. If you leave them to languish, if you leave their children out of school, you're putting in danger the future of Syria. You're possibly perpetuating the cycle of violence. So that's why we ask for urgently for continued investment.
I would like to thank you both for sharing your story, for being so brave, and for writing this story down and spreading it, for awakening empathy and compassion and showing us the human being, this tremendously important story behind the number. And I don't know, you know much more because you travel much more around the world, but I'm so sad that I notice the changing attitudes from 2015 when people were manifesting solidarity. And today, I mean, I know people call newspapers to report about a shipwreck the other day in Greece, and nobody even wanted to write about it.
Yeah, it's true. There is a lot of fatigue, and there are irresponsible politicians who are stoking the fears of people through a false narrative. But the good news is the compassion has not gone away. And, you know, we've done surveys in a number of countries. People still care. And we just need to, you know, continue to tell the stories. And that's why we also appreciate this full and packed house. It shows you also all care enough to come here and to listen to Doaa's story. And, you know, to think about the Syria crisis and to continue to do your part. So I even though sometimes I get really in despair at all of the suffering and the misery and the xenophobia and the, you know, fences coming up and the policies getting hardened, but I still see so many compassionate people in this world who really understand that people who flee war and persecution are fleeing through no fault of their own, and they deserve our solidarity, and they deserve asylum and our support.
Thank you so much for that very positive note. Thank you so much. Shukran, Habibi. And, well, good luck with everything. And you're still here. You will be here after, so you can have, you know, signatures in the books if you want. Thank you so much. And now, dear friends, Barbara Hendricks, an admired and an amazing artist, a real role model. She has sang on all the major opera stages around the world. After nearly 30 years of untiring service to the cause of refugee in collaboration with the UN Refugee Agency, she has been named the only honorary ambassador for life by UNHCR and is given special tasks that demand her long and paralleled experience and commitment. She is also the first president of the board of Sweden for UNHCR. And she will now appear with her beloved husband, who used to be a light designer here at Dramaten. Please welcome Ulf Englund and Barbara Hendricks.
Tack så mycket. Thank you very much. During the 30 years that I've worked with the UNHCR, I've had many inspirations. First of all, from my colleagues that I've met in the field who devoted their lives and who have sometimes lost their lives for the cause of refugees. And then there are the refugees themselves, especially the women. Whenever I'm feeling discouraged or despondent, I need only to think about the many courageous women that I've met in refugee sites all over the world. Since they can't give up, neither can I. They take care of their children. They maintain an incredible dignity for the sake of their children. And it is in the light that in the eyes of the children when they laugh and when they play. They give me hope in humanity and hope for the future. And so it is for those children that I have put together a medley for refugee children, which is the song of summertime, Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, and extracts from the poem Home by the Somalian-British poet Varsan Shire. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. No one leaves home unless home chases you, fire under your feet, hot blood in your belly. It's not something that you ever thought of doing until the blade burned threats into your neck. You have to understand, no one puts their child in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one chooses refugee camps or strip searches that leave your whole body aching. No one chooses prison, even though prison is safer than a city on fire. And one guard in the night is better than a truckload of men who look just like your father. No one can take it. No one's skin is tough enough. How do the words, the dirty looks roll off your back? Maybe because the blow is softer than a limb torn off. The insults easier to swallow than your child body in pieces. I want to go home. But home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun. And no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore, unless home told you to quicken your legs, leave everything behind, crawl through the desert, wade through the ocean, drown, be saved, beg, go hungry. Forget your pride. Your survival is more important. No one leaves home until home becomes a sweaty voice in your ear saying, leave, run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I do know that anywhere is safer than here. Sometimes I feel like a mother's child. Sometimes I feel like a mother's child. Sometimes I feel like a mother's child. Sometimes I feel like freedom is near. Sometimes I feel like freedom is near. Sometimes I feel like freedom is near. But it's a long ways from home. It's a long ways from home. One of these mornings, you're gonna rise up singing. Then you spread your wings and take the sky. But till that morning, there's nothing can harm you. With Daddy and Mommy standing by.
Oh my God. Amazing. Thank you so much. I love you, Barbara Hendricks. I love you too, Ulf. Thank you so much. Fantastic. So, now our evening has come to an end. And on behalf of Sweden for UNHCR, I want to thank you all for being here. And of course, I want to express a special thanks and my gratitude, our gratitude to the many, many generous donors to UNHCR that I know are in the audience. So thank you for supporting the life-saving work for the UNHCR and everything they do for helping and rescuing people that are forced to flee. And if anyone else wants to support, please don't be shy. There will be staff here ready to help you. And you'll also get the chance, as I told you earlier, to buy the book about Doaa, Melissa's book, and with a signature, and if you want to ask some questions and so on. And I have to add also that all the funds go towards the work in Syria. So, with these words, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for tonight.